Hey guys, welcome to the guide. In this episode we're talking about the Curtiss Hawk family. They were produced in the United States, made by the Curtiss Aircraft Corporation prior and during World War II. So this one is the P-36 Hawk, and it's a pretty awesome little fighter actually. It only saw combat by the United States Army Air Corps during the attack of Pearl Harbor, and which 5 were able to take off and were able to shoot down 2 Japanese Zeros. But it's a pretty awesome little plane. It was underarmed, at least the United States version was underarmed and a little bit underpowered, so they skipped over it because the latest and greatest prior to World War II were inline liquid-cooled engines, and this thing has a radial engine. So instead they made this, which this is the P40 Warhawk, also known as the Tomahawk. It has the same airframe as the P-36, they just slapped on an inline liquid-cooled engine. But that's also what makes this plane so awesome, because it gives it like that distinct chin. That chin's the radiator for the inline liquid-cooled engine, but it gives it that distinct chin, and it makes it just perfect for the shark's mouth. This plane is not the first plane to use the shark's mouth, but it's the plane that made the shark's mouth famous and made the shark's mouth look awesome. This one is the Chinese Flying Tigers version, the mercenary group that flew over in China during World War II. So yeah, you got that going. Alright, so first things first, the P-36 Hawk. Now, this is a plane that I actually was unaware of before I started playing War Thunder, the game that I'm playing. I didn't know about the P-36 Hawk, and it's a plane that you learn to respect pretty fast playing this game. At least this model. This model's the G model. It comes with 250 caliber machine guns in the nose, and then 4 30 caliber machine guns, 2 in each wings. And the A model of the P-36 is pretty weak. It's underarmed. It only has 150 caliber in the nose and 130 caliber machine gun in the nose. So like that plane doesn't get much respect. But this plane, the G model, gets a lot of respect. And like the first time you go up against one, you underestimate it quite a bit, and very quickly you learn to respect this plane a whole lot, because the dogfighting capabilities of this plane are like through the roof. I mean, this plane can outturn a Zero. This plane can outturn pretty much any other fighter in the game, except for maybe biplanes, and maybe the Russian I-16. But, like, yeah, this plane is insanely maneuverable. Like, insanely maneuverable. Alright, so on to the actual history of the P-36 Hawk. Its first flight was on May 15th, 1935. It went into service with the U.S. Army Air Corps, which was the predecessor to the U.S. Air Force, on April 20th, 1938. It was built to be an air superiority fighter. It had a length of 28 feet and a wingspan of 37 feet. It was powered by a Pratt & Whitney 1050 horsepower radial engine. Its top speed was 313 miles per hour at 8,500 feet, but it usually cruised around at 270 miles per hour to save gas. It had a range of 625 miles, and as I said before, the original model, the A model, only came with 150 caliber machine gun and 130 caliber machine gun, which was pretty lame, even by the beginnings of World War II standards, and I think that's one of the reasons it got phased out. But later models that like the Finns kept upgrading, which is I think is what this is the Finnish version, which they called the G model, came with 250 caliber machine guns in the nose and 4 30 calibers in the wings, 2 in each wings. I've said that before, but you know, I'm just restating it again. So, the only time the P-36 actually flew for the United States in World War II was during Pearl Harbor, where 5 of them were able to get up off the ground and shoot down 2 Japanese Zeros. But it did fly for other nations at the beginning of World War II. It flew for the French, which I didn't know about. A total of 230 air-to-air kills were claimed by French pilots who flew the P-36. So it did some ass-kicking for the French. 7 out of the 11 French aces of World War II flew P-36s. So yeah, it did some ass-kicking. And it also gets credit for the first Allied air victory by and it was flown by a French pilot. His name was Andre Armand Legrand, with my horrible pronunciation. He shot down a Messerschmitt Bf-109 on September 20th, 1939. So the first German aircraft shot down by any Allied nation was flown by a P-36. So that's got to say something. And it was known, the P-36 was known as the H-75 in France, and they had a total of 291 of them. So yeah, the P-36 did some ass kicking for the French. I mean, that's a bonus, and they were going up against Germany's best planes, and it still did a good job. But once the Germans were defeated the French, they sold all of the remaining French P-36s to Finland, who were currently fighting the Soviet Union at the time. And the Finns loved them. They affectionately called them like sweethearts. Like they loved the P-36, and they kept modernizing it and upgrading it. And they're the ones that stuck the 250 caliber machine guns in the nose and the 430 caliber machine guns in it. Like, they're the ones that pretty much created the G model, I'm pretty sure. Like, and they just kept continually upgrading the P-36, and they flew it throughout the war. It remained in service for Finland until August 1948. Like, the Finns loved the P-36. So, like, I think this plane just didn't have a chance to prove itself. Like, it was just the mindset before World War II was inline liquid-cooled engines were the latest and greatest. So they just kind of cut this plane short before it had a chance to prove itself to make the P40 Warhawk. I really think that's what happened. The British tested the P-36 and found out that it was inferior to the Spitfire, because, you know, the British have a thing with the Spitfire. Like, the Spitfire is like Jesus Christ in Britain. Like, that, you can't beat the Spitfire in Britain. It's not going to happen. So they didn't buy any personally, but they ended up with like a crap ton of them, because the P-36s that were destined for France, Norway, and the Netherlands, whenever they all got taken over by Nazi Germany, ended up in British hands. So the British transferred all of their P-36s that they got kind of accidentally to the Pacific War, but it seems like they didn't really use them much. Like, Great Britain was not very concerned about the Pacific War. That was mostly America's war, was the Pacific War. China had rights to produce the P-36, but once Japan started taking over too much of China, the manufacturing got moved to India, and most of the ones that were made in India got transferred to the RAF, the British Air Force. So Great Britain ended up with a lot of P-36s, but they pretty much ended up sitting on their hands with them, and they didn't really do a lot because, well, Britain's main concern was Nazi Germany and not Japan. Like, Japan was on the other side of the world. They were more concerned about trying to kick Nazi Germany's ass and then worry about Japan's. I think if the United States had stuck with the P-36 Hawk at the beginning of World War II, the U.S. Army Air Corps would have had a pretty good little dogfighter to start World War II off. Because at the beginning of World War II, we didn't really have anything. We had the P-39 Airacobra, which everybody thought was going to be awesome, but turned out to kind of not be as awesome as people thought it was going to be. And we had the P-40 Warhawk, which I'll talk about next, which, again, people thought that plane was going to be awesome. Turned out not to really be that awesome as a dogfighter. So if the United States would have stuck with this plane at the beginning of World War II, they would have had a pretty good little dogfighter. It wouldn't have been the fastest, but it would have been able to hold its own against like the Japanese Zero and the Messerschmitt Bf-109, because this thing did get 230 kills against the German Luftwaffe whenever it was flown by the French Air Force. So it did some ass kicking at the beginning of World War II, and I think it just never really got the chance that it might have deserved, because the mindset at the time was inline liquid-cooled engines were the way to go, and radials engines were a thing of the past, and those weren't needed anymore. So that brings us to the next thing, which is the P-40 Warhawk. And the main difference between the P-40 Warhawk and the P-36 Hawk is the engine. The P-36 used a radial engine, that caused a lot of drag, while the P-40 Warhawk used an inline liquid-cooled engine, which reduced drag, but it also made the aircraft heavier, so they had to beef up the airframe and make the airframe one size larger to accommodate the new inline liquid-cooled engine. And though the new inline liquid-cooled engine made the Warhawk faster than the Hawk, it also kind of killed the maneuverability of the Warhawk in comparison. The P-40 Warhawk is very much a boom and zoom fighter, so by that I mean is like you start up above the enemy planes and you dive down onto them, take a couple pop shots, and then use the energy that you have created in the dive to climb back up above them where they can't reach you again, and then do it all over again until you're out of ammunition. Like, the Flying Tigers, the American mercenary group that was sent over to China to help the Chinese fight the Japanese before America was officially involved in World War II, that's the tactics that they learned very quickly while flying the P-40 Warhawk. And they're also the people that gave the P-40 Warhawk its distinct shark smile on its chin, which makes the P-40 Warhawk. Like, aesthetically speaking, the P-40 Warhawk is one of the coolest planes ever built, in my opinion. Like, I would love to rebuild a P-40 Warhawk, even though I know it's a good plane if it's flown right, but if you don't fly it right and you fly it like most people want to, like with their instincts as a dogfighter, you will fail miserably. It's not a good dogfighter. If you fly it right, it's a very good airplane. Like, in this game, I've ran into... There's just one dude that I played this one game, and he shot me down twice in a P-40 Warhawk, you know? My ego got killed that day. It really did. I was just like, I just got shot down twice in the same game by the same dude flying the same damn P-40 Warhawk. Like, my ego got killed that day. I was like, I'm a pretty good pilot. And then that happened, and I was just like, damn. Alright, I just got humbled. And by the end of World War II, when squadrons in the Pacific that had been flying the P-40 Warhawk the entire war were finally getting like new replacements of P-51 Mustangs, the most legendary American fighter of World War II, a lot of them didn't like the P-51 Mustang. They flew it, they've tried to fly it, and then they immediately went back to their P-40 Warhawks because like they knew how to fly the P-40 Warhawk and they liked the P-40 Warhawk. So it was a good plane, and it was like an insanely good workhorse for the American forces, especially at the beginning part of World War II. It's just you had to know how to fly it, and you have to be extremely smooth with this plane. If you're not smooth with this plane and you're really jerky with it, because it has a tendency to buck. Because of that radiator in the front of it, it throws the center of gravity off in the plane. So it has a tendency to buck around if you're not really smooth with this airplane, which took me a while to figure out flying it. So you have to be kind of gentle with this plane, but once you figure out how to fly it, it's a pretty good plane. It's just not the most amazing plane. It turned out to be a workhorse of an airplane, is pretty much what it turned out to be. It could do the dirty jobs that didn't necessarily get all the glory, but still needed to be done. Like, the ground attack role is really what it excelled at. It had a good bomb load by early World War II standards, with 700 pounds worth of bombs on it. And that's really what it excelled at. It was rugged, it was reliable, it had a reputation of bringing the pilots back home safely. Its only drawback was that if the radiator took a hit because it was like right up front just below the engine, then the engine would overheat. But even then, that usually gave the pilot enough time to get back to friendly lines before the engine kicked the bucket and then bail out. So the pilot still came back perfectly fine and could be flying the next day. So in that case, it was pretty good. It just wasn't a dogfighter, which was America's major drawback in the early stages of World War II, is America didn't have a fucking dogfighter at all. So it just never got the glory of later fighters like the P-51 Mustang, because it just wasn't a very good dogfighter, but it excelled in the ground attack role. Alright, to the specs. It had a wingspan of 37 feet and a length of 31 feet, so it was bigger than the P-36 Hawk, and a top speed of 367 miles per hour at 12,000 feet, so it was like 45 miles per hour faster than the Hawk. It had a 1,150 horsepower Allison 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engine and a range of 850 miles. It was armed with 650 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, and had a total bomb load of 700 pounds, which was pretty good by early World War II standards. A total of 13,738 were built, making it the third most produced American airplane in World War II. Pretty much, if you were an ally of the USA during World War II, you got a shipment of P-40 Warhawks sooner or later. And yeah, that's the most important stuff. It was retired by the Brazil Air Force in 1958, so it had a pretty long service life. It was around for a while. Alright, thanks for watching.